Forget thrones, treasures, or battles. Today we're uncovering something far more revealing, yet often left out of history books. We're going behind the walls, beneath the stone, and into the most private part of medieval life: the toilet. Yes, the toilet. And not just any toilet. We're talking inside Colchester Castle, one of England's oldest Norman strongholds, to explore a forgotten corner of history that tells us far more about medieval people than their swords or crowns ever could. To understand life in the Dark Ages, you have to understand where people lived, what they ate, and just as importantly, where it all ended up.
In a time before plumbing, privacy, or porcelain, the act of doing your business was very different. And yet it was something every king, knight, servant, and prisoner had to deal with. Toilets may be undignified by today's standards, but back then, they were a vital piece of survival. Walk along the cold stone walls of Colchester Castle, and you'll find narrow vertical shafts built right into the fortress itself. Tucked near the arrow slits, just wide enough for a man to sit in, are the remains of ancient latrines. They were called privies, or more elegantly,
the garderobe.
These weren't much more than small stone closets, each fitted with a wooden or stone seat and a hole. That hole opened directly to the outside world, allowing waste to fall down a chute, far away from the living quarters. If you were lucky, the seat might have been smooth. If you were very lucky, it wasn't already occupied. But it wasn't just about comfort. Castle architects had to think about every vulnerability. If the chute was too low, it became a risk. Invaders could use them to crawl inside, so builders made sure they were high up, angle down, and out, and nearly impossible to climb.
It's strange to think that something so mundane could also be a matter of military strategy. Well, if the castle garderobe was the high seat of medieval hygiene, then what about the rest of the population?
While kings and noblemen relieved themselves in cramped stone alcoves built into fortress walls, peasants and townsfolk faced a far rougher reality. For most people in the Dark Ages, a toilet was anything but private or clean. In rural villages, the most common option was a simple pit dug into the ground, sometimes lined with wood or straw. These were called cesspits or latrine trenches. If you were fortunate, there was a rough wooden bench laid across the top. If not, you squatted. There were no walls, no roof, just the open air and the hope that no one happened to wander by at the wrong moment. In colder seasons, using the latrine was a miserable task. In rain, it turned to mud. In winter, ice. And the smell, especially in summer, was something that lingered far beyond the visit itself. But that was still better than nothing. In many places, people relieved themselves wherever they could, behind barns and alleyways, or even in buckets within their homes. These buckets were then emptied onto nearby dung heaps or tossed into the street. It wasn't uncommon for someone to shout a warning,
God below,
before throwing waste from a window, hoping anyone below had quick reflexes. If you think city life was more advanced, think again. Medieval towns were dense, chaotic, and lacked even the most basic sewage systems. Waste flowed in open gutters along the sides of roads, and drains, if they existed, were often clogged. The risk of disease was constant. Without proper containment or sanitation, these makeshift toilets became breeding grounds for illness. Dysentery, cholera, and parasitic infections were part of daily life.
Yet despite all this, people managed. They adapted, they created routines, and slowly, over time, ideas of cleanliness began to evolve. So, how did people in the Dark Ages stay clean, if at all?
The truth is, their relationship with hygiene was a strange mix of superstition, practicality, and trial and error. For many, cleanliness wasn't just a matter of comfort. It was believed to be tied directly to health, morality, and even the will of God. But not in the way we understand it today. Medieval doctors didn't fully grasp the concept of germs or infection. Instead, they believed in balancing the body's four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Illness came from imbalance, and sometimes bad smells, what they called miasmas, were thought to be physical signs of disease floating through the air. This meant that while bathing was seen as beneficial, it was also feared. Hot water could open the pores and, in their view, make the body more vulnerable to bad air. Some physicians even warned against washing too often, suggesting it made people sick.
But bathing still happened.
Just not in the way you might think. In monasteries, monks practiced regular hand washing and had designated latrines and washrooms. These were some of the cleanest places in the medieval world. They even had primitive systems to bring in fresh water and carry away waste, early plumbing in a sense. Nobles sometimes had wooden tubs filled with heated water, perfumed with herbs like lavender or rosemary. Servants would help pour water and scrub the skin. It was a luxury, but not a daily one. At most, it was a ritual done every few weeks, sometimes less. For everyone else, cleaning up meant wiping with moss, hay, straw, or if you were lucky, a scrap of linen. Soap was rare and often made from harsh substances like ash and animal fat. Still, people made do. Communal bathhouses existed in larger towns, though over time they gained reputations for being places of vice and disease, especially during plagues. Despite these challenges, there was a constant push through trial, tradition, and sheer necessity to keep life livable, even if clean was a relative term. Back inside the castle walls, we return to the medieval solution known as the garderobe, a toilet built into the very bones of stone strongholds. At first glance, it seems clever. A hole in the wall, a shaft that drops outside, gravity doing the work. But behind this simple design was a world of discomfort, odors, and occasional disaster. The garderobe was usually tucked into a tower or outer wall, anywhere waste could be directed far from living quarters. Builders would carve a vertical shaft into the masonry, sloping just slightly so the contents would drop down and splash outside the castle base, or into a cesspit or moat.
What about the seat?
Often just a wooden plank with a round opening carved in. Some were stone, polished smooth by centuries of use. It was cold in winter, hot in summer, and always drafty.
Now imagine using it during a siege.
No kidding, with food running low and water being rationed, the last thing a castle needed was a sanitation issue. Yet garderobes became a point of vulnerability. If the shaft wasn't properly placed, it could leak, or worse, freeze in the winter and back up.
And then there was the smell.
Well, castle walls were thick, but not thick enough to trap centuries of odor. Many garderobes shared walls with sleeping chambers or kitchens. In wealthier castles, they were placed away from main halls, but in smaller ones, the stench often lingered like an unwelcome guest. To combat this, people tried remedies. Bundles of herbs were hung near the seat: lavender, sage, thyme. Lime was sprinkled into the chute. In some castles, a stream of water was diverted under the shaft to carry waste away, an early form of flushing, centuries before plumbing became standard.
Someone had to clean it, right?
Gong farmers, yes, that was their name, were the unfortunate laborers hired to dig out cesspits and haul away the waste. It was dangerous, disgusting work. They were well paid, but shunned socially, living on the edges of towns. Even so, their work kept society moving, literally and figuratively.
The medieval toilet may seem crude, even laughable today. But what it left behind has helped archaeologists paint a vivid picture of life, diet, and health in the Dark Ages, one waste layer at a time.
In castle ruins across Europe, garderobe shafts are often some of the best preserved features. Their contents, long sealed off from air and sun, have protected everything from food scraps to fabric fibers, and yes, human waste. What's buried in these chutes is a time capsule. Scientists have found seeds, bones, parasites, and even ancient pollen trapped in layers of muck. From these clues, we now know what people ate, what illnesses they carried, and how their environment changed over time. In York, England, the discovery of a massive Viking-era latrine known as the Lloyd's Bank coprolite revealed evidence of intestinal worms and a barley-heavy diet. At London's Billingsgate site, cesspits showed remains of imported fruits, suggesting a bustling trade network. Even scraps of cloth, buttons, and jewelry have been found in medieval toilet shafts, dropped by accident or perhaps tossed away in a moment of panic. But it's not just the artifacts that tell a story. The very design of these toilets, the way they were hidden in corners, angled away from key chambers, or clustered for communal use, tells us how people lived together and how they adapted to the challenges of waste in a world without plumbing. These weren't just smelly holes in the wall. They were designed with intention. They balanced privacy, defense, practicality, and occasionally dignity. And in their own quiet way, they remind us that every person, no matter their time or status, shares the same basic needs. In the end, it's the smallest details that often connect us most deeply to the past. So next time you visit a castle and gaze up at the stone walls, look for a narrow opening, perhaps halfway up a tower or just above the moat.
That tiny chute, forgotten and overlooked, carried the most human part of history. Thanks for joining us in this journey into the less glamorous side of medieval life. If you enjoyed uncovering the secrets of history with us, be sure to hit that like button. It helps more curious minds find their way here. Don't forget to subscribe to Gods and Gladiators for more immersive stories from the ancient world. And if you're still in the mood to explore, click the video on your screen now for another tale from the shadows of the past. Until next time, thank you for learning with us.